Hello and welcome to the state of Kentucky. I'm Bruce Maples, the publisher of Forward Kentucky and your host, and we're really glad you have joined us today. I want to remind everybody before we get started with our main content that if you comment on Facebook or on YouTube, we can see those comments and we may show them on the show. So let's talk about a word. Let's talk about an important word. That word is existential. It obviously comes from the word exist and refers to the ability of something or someone to exist. It's often used in conjunction with other words like existential threat or existential danger. It's unusual for the word to be used a lot with nations. It's often used with companies. This other company is an existential threat to us. It can sometimes be used with humans. If you get cancer, that's an existential danger to you. But it's unusual for it to be used about countries, but it still is appropriate. Sometimes it's used obviously by politicians and people with political commentary, but sometimes it's used and it's accurate. Hitler's Germany was definitely an existential danger to Czechoslovakia and Poland and other places like that. So it's unusual, as I said, to be used, but it happens occasionally. But what do you do when a group of people call your current leader an existential danger? So a group has come together called the Steady State, and they have put forward a couple of statements. And before we talk about the statements, I want to share with you their website. So if you look at this website, let me take that banner down. All right, good. If you look at this site and you start looking at the signatures, these are not keyboard jockeys, writing from somebody's basement. Here's the Professor Emeritus at American University, former Senior Director for Counterterrorism, retired CIA intelligence officer, Assistant Secretary of Defense. I mean, just look at this list. This is not chopped liver. These are serious people. And yet they have come together to make some pretty strong statements. So we're going to be joined today by one of those people, Dr. Erik Prentice. And I have to say that I'll let him talk for himself about his resume, but when I looked at his resume, I was exceptionally impressed. It's a very strong resume. So Erik Prentice, welcome to the state of Kentucky.
Hi, Bruce. Thanks so much for having me.
Before we get to the steady state and we talk about what's in those statements and so on and so forth, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background and what you've done with your life and what you're doing now.
Sure. So I am a scientist by training and by temperament. I think is the way I've always phrased it.
Okay.
So starting kind of way back when in the late 90s into the early 2000s, I went and got a PhD in microbiology and immunology from Vanderbilt University. I think importantly for these times, those studies were focused on coronavirus mechanisms of replication.
Right.
And so while we mostly used a mouse model in the lab, we also were one of the first labs in the country to gain access to samples when SARS-1 broke out.
Right.
And so worked with the National Institutes of Health, United States Army Medical Research Institute for Infectious Diseases, and others to help characterize SARS and to help understand how it was causing disease and those sorts of things. Towards the end of that career, at that time I had thought maybe I might want to stay in academic research, et cetera. Certainly 9/11 happened right in the middle of my graduate work. And so that instilled sort of a new level of interest in service to the nation. And so as I finished up my graduate studies, I had an opportunity. I was recruited by the Defense Intelligence Agency to come work in their organization to look at biological threats. Now, those biological threats could have been intentional biological warfare actions by other countries, by terrorist groups, but also importantly, national occurring diseases as well. was with.
Go ahead.
Oh no, that's good. With DIA, I was there for about 3 years, and then I volunteered to go lead the CBRN team in Baghdad, Iraq. We were looking to help prevent troops from being attacked by CBRN weapons by insurgents, etc. So did that for a bit in 2006, and then upon return, joined the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in the National Counterproliferation Center. There, I helped coordinate the overall intelligence community response to biological threats, and then worked very closely with the National and Homeland Security Councils of the Bush and Obama White Houses.
Okay. Before we go any further, CBRM?
Chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that pretty well covers it, doesn't it?
Anything bad that could be used to attack you is another way to think of it. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I noticed that you were in the office of the DNI at the end, and then you left public service and went into business, I believe.
That's correct. So after leaving the government service, I spent the next 6-7 years working in corporate consulting. So helping companies understand sort of what their competitive landscape looks like, helping largely pharmaceutical companies understand how their drugs are positioned compared to others, help them develop strategies, et cetera. And then in December of this past year, I went out on my own, formed a company called Sixth Floor Insights that does biotechnology consulting and advising to the U.S. government and other clients as well.
Okay. And you also moved back to Louisville.
I did. Yes, I grew up here. For the Louisvillians around, I'm a 1992 St. X grad, but then moved back here to be closer to family and certainly to be back in a city that I love.
Okay. Let's talk about the steady state.
Sure.
When I was told about this organization or this group, I don't even know if it's fair to call it an organization, but it's a group at least of veterans of Homeland Security, national security, various places like that. Can you tell us a little bit about how that group came together? What exactly is it, and why did it get started?
Sure. So I think probably unsurprisingly, folks in the national security community are relatively tight-knit. We retain connections with each other, a sense of shared service, those sorts of things. This group came together, I think, originally shortly after the inauguration of Donald Trump with some concerns. There was a letter released shortly after the inauguration by national security officials and professionals about concerns specifically around Michael Flynn, some of the issues regarding to Russian interference, those sorts of things. Basically saying we are concerned. Let's take a pause. Let's focus. We then sort of died down a little bit. We stayed in contact with each other, et cetera, but stepped to the background a bit. I think we have all watched over the past several years with an increasing sense of dismay. It may be too strong a word, but not really. At the operations within this administration, and certainly as we come into an election year, felt it was important enough for this group of individuals. And it's important, I think, to note here, this is not a group of 200 dyed-in-the-wool, diehard blue Democrats. These are people who are American patriots. While we certainly all have political beliefs and beliefs in particular policies, this is not in its essence a political organization. There are certainly many folks within this group that would be considered Republicans or independents, and under normal times, under normal circumstances, we would be having relatively fierce policy debates. These are not normal times. These are not normal circumstances. And what has pulled us together is a concern, you mentioned it in your intro, of existential danger to the nation. And so we have come together feeling it's incumbent upon us as patriots and as Americans to come out and endorse Joe Biden as the opponent to Donald Trump, as a way to hopefully get the nation back on a better course.
So let's talk for a minute about that phrase, existential danger.
Sure.
I certainly agree with that. I have all sorts of opinions about the danger that Donald Trump and his administration pose to our nation. But from the point of view of this group, what do you see as the existential danger that Donald Trump poses?
I think from our perspective, from a national security perspective, the damage that this administration has done to our standing in the international community can almost not be overstated. We have alienated allies. We have abrogated treaties that helped uphold the peace of the world for decades following the Cold War. We have taken a back seat in terms of a leadership position about moral direction within the world as well. It is disturbing. I certainly maintain contacts with a number of folks who are still active in government service, and it is disturbing to talk to them and to hear how many negotiations and discussions we have with countries that were once stalwart allies who effectively have said, we are largely going to pause our discussions with you or put them in kind of a holding pattern until this administration runs its course. That is damaging to national security, international security, and certainly will be an area that if Biden wins the contest, will be a significant amount of work to repair that distrust and the damage that's been done.
So basically, the group, or you at least, are really focused on the damage that the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself have done to our relationships to our allies. What about our relationships to our supposed enemies?
I think we've all watched with curiosity or horror, depending on how strongly you want to go, with the approach this administration has taken to enemies. As a former intelligence officer who focused on foreign state threats, to see the president of the United States publicly say that he trusted Vladimir Putin over his intelligence agencies was heart-wrenching, was a statement that I could not ever imagine coming out of the mouth of an American president. So to hear that, to hear the amount of trust that this administration has put in foreign leaders with approaches to governance that are not consistent with American values, dictators, North Korea's brutal regime, Russia's brutal regime, et cetera, I think has been really disheartening.
So you say you talk to people who are still serving. One of the things that's been pointed out by some reporters is basically the hollowing out of some of these institutions, specifically related to the State Department, where there are tons of open positions that have not been filled. In terms of the security apparatus that you're familiar with, has that also happened there?
I think so. I think there's been a hollowing out of folks who have left service, who have said this just isn't worth it anymore. And beyond that, I think the morale of those who have remained has been just amazingly depressed. The folks that I do still talk to, they are patriots. They are trying hard to serve. We've all had administrations where policies we didn't necessarily agree with, but it was our duty to uphold those and support those as best we could. But the morale, I think, amongst those remaining in service is dangerously low at this moment. And I will say, we have been focused largely on the international security component, but I think we'll point out as well that the Steady State did just release a letter in support of the Department of Justice alumni who are protesting the Department of Justice's actions with respect to the Michael Flynn case, the Roger Stone case, et cetera, which I think is another real existential danger that this administration is posing to the nation. And that is a real diminution of the influence and the belief in the rule of law and the impartiality of our judiciary.
So let me follow up on that for just a minute. For those of us who watch politics, not just for the horse race or not just for the game of it, but for the long-term implications, which is what we've been talking about, the Michael Flynn dropping of the case just was so worrying and shocking to me, and basically really seems to be coming after the rule of law. Does the steady state group see it that way? See it as an attack on the fundamental rule of law concept in our country?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think again, we will stand shoulder to shoulder, and I think there were over 2,000 former Department of Justice officials who signed a letter protesting the dismissal or the attempted dismissal of the Flynn case. Seeing it as that just that a violation of our respect for the rule of law. I think it's interesting that the judge in that case seems to be pushing back against that in any way that he can, in terms of the ability, inviting amicus briefings from interested parties. That chapter is not fully written yet. Certainly, we hope that it does not go. It does not allow the Trump administration just to sweep this sort of under the rug. But absolutely, to answer your question, we very much see this as an attack on the importance of the rule of law.
So let's talk about the steady state and their endorsement of Joe Biden, which if somebody goes to steadystate.org, or excuse me, it's thesteadystate.org,
Right.
you can go read this. Why did the group decide to do this, and what does this mean? Is the group doing anything other than the endorsement?
So what it means is that our professional judgment is that a Biden administration gives the best chance for a nation to recover its leadership position in the world, and to start to repair the fractured relationships and to repair sort of a fractured world order that has occurred under the Trump administration. What it means is there are some within the group who are able to more formally participate and consult with the Biden administration. In the interim, certainly what it means is we will continue to speak out and speak out as vocally as we can. When we see actions such as the Flynn case, such as other instances that are coming up as well, the outing of the career CIA officer who gave the presidential daily briefing regarding coronaviruses, et cetera, we will continue to speak out and call and speak loudly about issues where we find there to be real harm done by the Trump administration.
So, without trying to sound poo-poo-ish about it, I mean, the fact that this group of people whose resumes together are just so incredible, and I don't mean to, kiss up or anything, but these are really strong resumes, and yet the group released a letter and endorsed Joe Biden and hasn't, as far as I see, hasn't done anything else. Are there any plans to do something like the Lincoln Project, which has done some videos, or to do any, commercials or any sort of things like that to get your message out further?
I think we've had discussions within the group about how do we increase our presence either through traditional or social media. Exactly what those plans are, I don't think are completely formulated yet. Certainly, individuals have taken responsibility for becoming more active, particularly in social media, for putting forward the message of the steady state, but then also putting forth their own personal messages of concern about actions that are ongoing in the Trump administration, et cetera. So I think that's a little bit of a TBD in terms of exactly what formal actions are going to be taken. But certainly we have begun to be more active within the past month or so in terms of promoting the views that we have and the dangers that we see.
Let me follow up with a question about the people you've spoken with. One of the things that seems to be ongoing is this attempt to do whatever makes Donald Trump look good, even if it is opposed by the professional staff. And in any government institution, you have the political staff that gets appointed, and you have the professional staff that was there before you came and will be there after you leave.
Right.
Without naming names, obviously, can you share some things that your friends have told you have happened under the Trump administration where the professionals have been ignored or told to be quiet?
Sure. So I think there are a number that have actually become sort of public knowledge. The most recent one, obviously, is the scapegoating being done now of a 30-year career CIA agent who briefs the president on coronavirus as part of the presidential daily brief. They are now publishing that, she diminished the threat. As someone who has worked closely with the offices both at CIA and within Department of Defense that look at natural infectious disease and emerging infectious diseases, I find that very, very difficult to believe. I find that wholly uncredible. I think, if anything, those of us who have backgrounds in infectious disease right away recognize that this was something different, right? SARS and MERS were serious in their own way. They were not as concerning from a pandemic perspective as SARS coronavirus 2 is. But as soon as we saw sustained human-to-human transmission in ways that were consistent with an aerosol or a small droplet mechanism, the folks that I still talk to recognized right away that this was a serious concern. So I find that wholly non-credible that the intelligence community did not give significant warning. That is one example. Certainly maintain contact with folks in EPA and the Environmental Protection Agency. The morale in that organization probably could not go any lower. The frank war, really, that this administration has waged on environmental regulations, the complete diminution of the importance of science and the importance of fact in making regulations, particularly around the environment, has been tremendously problematic for the EPA and other organizations as well. And those sorts of stories can be repeated ad nauseum for virtually every department and agency in the executive branch.
Do you think that, obviously, a lot of these people have military background and public service background? Do you think that there is a culture where you just don't say anything publicly? Let me explain what I mean. I have this sort of Hollywoodish view that somebody like this CIA professional would just say, "I've had it," and walk out and hold a press conference and say, "These are all the things that have been done, and I'm sick and tired of it, and you people need to know." And yet I don't see those except like the steady state people who have left the service.
I think there's a couple things. One, there very much is a sort of chain of command mentality, particularly within the intelligence agencies and within the Department of Defense. And so I think that ethos kind of pervades a lot of our dealings. And that is, it's very difficult as a career service person to feel like you're completely disrespected by the commander in chief, the highest ranking person in the United States. And so I think there is an element of that. That being said, I do think there have been a surprising number of folks who, I mean, even from just within the cabinet officials that have left, nearly every cabinet official who has left this administration has not had kind things to say, whether that's Rex Tillerson, General Mattis. I mean, there's a whole list of folks who haven't had kind things to say about how this administration functions as they leave. So I do think it is difficult. The other piece that is not to be overlooked, and it's an issue that we frankly discussed a little bit within the steady state as well, is this is an administration that seems to be particularly punitive. They particularly seem to have quite a bit of interest in payback. And if you don't toe the line, we will see what the final story is regarding Rick Bright, the now deposed head of BARDA, so the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Agency within HHS that's responsible for advanced vaccine development, amidst other things. He was replaced recently. His side of the story, again, we haven't heard the whole thing, but his side of the story is that was due to not following the president's directive and others within the administration's directive regarding hydroxychloroquine. And so I think that sort of revenge is an issue that folks are concerned about as career agents. You go into the field for, I think, the right reasons to serve the country, et cetera, but you also want to have a good career and have a livelihood as well. And to get sidelined, marginalized, or reassigned someplace that is going to dead end your career is just a real threat.
It seems to me that with the Rick Bright thing and with some of the things coming out of the DOJ, we are crossing a line from "I'm going to tweet bad things about you" to "I'm going to send the Department of Justice after you," which feels very different.
Yes, I think there's a lot of concern about the weaponization of the Department of Justice. You know, for things to have moved to what feels like that it is now not quite criminal, but at least will invite an investigation to disagree with the president is a concerning place for America, right? Those are actions, those sorts of actions, the utilization of the official apparatus of investigation to handle personal grudges, to handle dissent, those sorts of things are actions that are not consistent with American values, that are actions that would be taken by despotic regimes.
Right. So let me ask you one last question. Actually, I have two last questions. One uh, is there anything that I didn't ask you about or that you wanted to talk about? Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
As a scientist and especially as a coronavirologist by training, I think one of the things that's concerned me, and this is in parallel, I think, with the steady state, is the way that this administration has handled this pandemic. I think mirrors the concerns that the steady state has about national security. Right, the basic abrogation of the importance of truth and fact in the handling of this situation. The basic unwillingness to accept responsibility for actions that were or were not taken has really been concerning. And I think that the absence of strong federal leadership and the challenges that we see that presenting internationally are being realized domestically in the handling of the
Yeah.
coronavirus as well, right? So the lack of this strong federal response has resulted in a patchwork of responses by governors who are by and large doing the very best they can. And thank goodness we have Andy Beshear here in Kentucky. I think he's done an amazing job and has done an appropriate job in terms of trying to mitigate the risks associated with that. But that void of leadership and that void of responsibility on the pandemic, I think has brought home, in a domestic sense, some of the challenges that we've seen internationally.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I didn't want to, as a person who loves science myself, I didn't want to geek out on the whole, talking about the medicine. But
I'm a geek at heart, so I'm happy to go geek.
I do agree, though. It's obvious that the federal administration has just completely botched this entire response. And story came out this week about, well, if we had done X, Y, and Z, we might have saved 30,000 lives. Sure. So my last question is this. The steady state talks about Donald Trump as an existential danger to the country, and that's why the group was formed. That's why they've done these letters, and now that's why they've come out supporting Joe Biden for president. We are all hoping that Joe Biden is elected and can begin cleaning up this train wreck that we've been given by the administration. What if he's not? What if Donald Trump is reelected? What do you and the people that you speak to see?
Then I think that we as the people need to do what we can to preserve those core American values that we are worried about so much. The average citizen can't do a tremendous amount to impact, whether the United States stays in international treaties for arms reduction. Right. There's not a ton they can do there, but I think we can continue to put pressure on state, local, and federal officials to uphold the values that have been, consistent with America since the founding. Right. Call out that we can't have, situations like the Flynn case where we are violating the rule of law or at least perverting it in some way. I think it is going to be very important, and certainly the presidency is an incredibly important position. Continuing to work on House, so Congress, so Senate, House members, those sorts of things. So electing people who can help hold this administration accountable, because I think one of the real challenges we run into is presidents are not omnipotent, but they can become more so by having an enabling Congress.
Yes.
And I think that's what we've seen in the first 2 years of the administration. Certainly the House flipped, obviously, at the midterm elections. So there's been a little bit more accountability held, but continuing to promote officials that will hold the administration accountable. That does not mean that all those folks that does not mean that only Democrats can hold Republican administrations accountable. I think certainly we should have Republicans who are saying, and there are some out there, Chuck Grassley came out and said he was concerned about the Flynn case, et cetera. But there are some who have been willing to speak up, but many have not. Many have fallen back, I think, out of fear that they will anger a base of voters for themselves. So I think, but we as the people have to continue to promote and elect officials that will uphold American values.
Let's hope that we
Right.
do all of that this fall. And let's
Absolutely.
hope that Steady State and all of the national security and homeland security professionals that are in that group, including you, are able to get their voices out there and get people to pay attention to the danger that this administration poses to our nation and even to the world. Dr. Erik Prentice, we really appreciate you being with us. Thank you for coming on the State of Kentucky, and we're glad to have you back in Louisville.
Great. Bruce, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it.
All right. That was Erik Prentice, doctor of microbiology and member of the Steady State, and that is thesteadystate.org if you want to go look at that. As we wrap up this week, I want to remind you of a couple of things. First of all, you can become a member and support this work by going to forwardky.com/join. The paying members are the people who pay for things like this, and so we would like to have your support if you enjoy the work we do. And finally, if you have ideas or suggestions for the show or for anything, you can send them to tips@forwardky.com, and we will be glad to have them. We always enjoy getting ideas for the show, particularly people you would like to see on. Thank you for joining us this week. Thank you for being part of the State of Kentucky.